How you going, folks? You're really welcome to this week's episode of John's Garage. This week, I'm going to take us, or not me, the owner is going to take us on a tour of their 1936 Austin 7. Now, this is a really important year for the Austin 7. It's a 100-year anniversary. It's the centenary of the Austin 7 car. And luckily, we're here today. The owner's going to take us on an in-depth tour of their car. They're going to look at the history of the car, the original owner, what they've learned about it, and their experience of it. And fingers crossed, if I get brave enough before the end of this video, I might even take a short drive in it myself. I've never driven anything as old as this. I've never even been in anything as old as this, but I'm intrigued. I just think it's such a special car. And the most important thing about it is it's an Irish car as well, okay? And there's a couple of different features that really belong to an Irish car, which the owner will point out as we go through the video. So listen, I'm going to hand you over to Paul, so let's get on with it.
So John, welcome to a bit of pre-war motoring. What you have here today is a 1936 Austin 7 Ruby. It was manufactured in September, October 1936. It was put on the road. It was sold in Leicester in the UK the first week in January 1937. And about 2 weeks later, it's imported into Ireland by the same owner. I have the brown logbook from then, where the Irish Customs in Dublin stamped the book, and it was subsequently stamped by Cork County Council every January, clean through until 1960. So it's a one family owner, or it's a one family ownership all the way through to 2015 when I bought the car. So it has spent all its motoring life in North Cork. There was two owners, the original owner and his niece had it on the road clean through until 1960. It was then taken off the road, and the third member of the family was given the car. It languished a bit in an oat farm for many years. It was sometime in the early 90s, I believe, restoration began. It was sent down to the Motor Museum in Kilgarvan, down to the Mitchell family, who did extensive work on the body. The mechanicals were done over. Sadly, the then owner of the car passed away, and I bought the car in 2015 with it about 80-85% done. It was a rolling chassis, no interior, no wiring. A lot of the panels were off it. I always say it was like buying a jigsaw with no cover. I had no idea what the finished product was going to be like. So it was a voyage of discovery for me. This is my first time I have done any work on a pre-war car. So as I walk through the car, I'll be showing a few bits and pieces, and I'll show you what I have learned with the car. But it's been an absolute joy to own, a joy to work with, and the amount of people that smile and just love to see the car has been a huge pleasure for me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been very reliable, and once you get used to its quirks and its idiosyncrasies, it's actually a very easy car to drive. Pedals are all where they should be. There's very little in driving it, bar starter and off you go. So John, I'll just give you a quick walk around the car. These cars are simple, and at the same time they can have quite an amount of quirks about them. This is the more simple of the two sides. So basically what you have on this side is you have a mechanical fuel pump, and you'd sort of say what's so special about the fuel pump. The very early models of these 7s had the fuel tank across here, and you gravity feed down onto the carb and into the engine, whereas now we have a mechanical fuel pump, which is a vacuum pump. So there's a little tab out of that pump onto the crankshaft that works the vacuum, sucks the petrol in up to the carb. The Zenith carb, which is a simple enough carb, the only adjustments you have is a fuel air mixture and a mechanical for the revs, and that's it. Once The engine has clean petrol and air, off it goes. It's a low compression engine. It takes very little for it to run, and it's proved very reliable. She's very easy at starting once it's got the fuel. About every second run that I do it, I seem to have to just strip the carb, take the float ball out, check that there's no grit or dirt inside in the fuel pump, otherwise off it goes. This is the more interesting side of the engine. The engine itself is a 750cc side valve engine. So I think the Americans probably call them flatheads. Siphon cooling, so you have the red one pipe down and one underneath, and it just circulates. She's got a dynamo rather than the modern alternators, and off the dynamo you have a shaft which will run the distributor. Again, being a more modern Austin 7, it's got a distributor very similar to what modern cars will have, through the coil and down onto the plugs. Starter motor is again very similar to modern cars, with one slight exception. It doesn't have an electric solenoid. It's got just a mechanical pull cable inside, and that literally pulls, and that pulls the solenoid in and the starter motor runs. It can be very handy if you're working on the car and you're out here, because all you have to do is pull back the lever and it will turn the engine for you. Battery sits inside here. It's now running on 12 volts. It would have been originally 6 volts. And I know the purists cringe when I tell them I'm running it on 12 volts. I'm an electrician by trade. I always say to myself, well, what would I have done to this car if I had it back in the day? One of the first jobs I would have done would have been converted to 12 volt. It gives easier starting. It gives better lights, batteries are easier and cheaper to get. It just has a whole load of advantages. Some of the quirks of the car, apart from the likes of the starter motor, would have been the headlights. When I got the car first, my first experience of pre-war motoring, so I hadn't a clue what was in front of me. It took me a while to discover the lighting. So basically, when you're on main beam, your two headlights are on, which is grand. When you go into dip beam, this light goes out. That light had a solenoid at the back of it, which physically turned the reflector towards the ditch, so you wouldn't be blinding oncoming cars. It took me quite a while to discover that. This car is now running on 12 volts, so I've grafted the parking lights into the reflectors here. So what were the parking lights originally are now indicators. Coming around to the car itself inside. So again, everything is pretty well as you would expect to see it in the modern cars. The Austin 7 was the first mass-produced car with the brakes, the clutch, the accelerator in what we now regard as its normal position. The gauges are pretty well self-explanatory. You have an ammeter, you have oil pressure, you have fuel, you have speedo. This would have been originally for the semaphores, which just pop out on the side. Modern cars don't have anything of the sort, but they're just static and people just don't see them anymore. So I have installed modern indicators to make it a bit more safe on the road. It's got drum brakes all around. So she's running on 17-inch 400 by 17 tyres. The brakes are all cable. So again, they came up with a very convoluted way of doing something simple. You have a rod from their brakes out to about here, cable back to that wheel, a tube within a tube for some form of balancing for the other brake, and you have another cable from the two front brakes coming onto that centerpiece as well. Earlier versions of this, the foot brake operated the back wheels, the handbrake operated the front wheels. And sometimes if you really want a bit of extra braking, you'd pull the handbrake as well on this even. So as I said, the fuel tank is where it should be. Inside here you have the spare wheel and spare tyre. One of the nice things about the car, when I got it, she was still on its original tyres. The tyres were Dunlop tyres, and written on them was made in Saerstadt Airn. So they'd been manufactured presumably in Cork. And what's nice about it, this car now lives within sight of the old Dunlop factory. So I always think the tyres are gone home. The spare tyre is still one of those original tyres as a keepsake. So one last item about the car is it obviously doesn't have a boot. The spare tyre is in here. And in the 30s high security days, a square key opened the lock, and inside you have a spare tyre, but also, which I think may or may not have been an extra, was this wonderful little rack for carrying your suitcase on the outside. And off you went for your weekend away with your suitcases up on the back. Austin, actually, if you want Austin were very proud of all their pieces in this car. So they have patented everything. So there's a little patent on that lad there, and inside on the dash you have a patent plate for all the different pieces that they introduced in this car. I'm not certain whether they were they just advertising all the different new ideas in it, or were they trying to protect their manufacturing rights? So over the years, the windscreen has gathered a few bits and pieces. Obviously, it's got the tax disc and insurance like all modern cars. Here is what I call a little bit of gold. It reads the Emergency Powers Mechanically Propelled Vehicles Order 1942. It's dated 30th of September 1943. So the original owner was what I suppose we nowadays would call a frontline worker. So during the war years, with petrol rationing, most cars were put off the road. This car was allowed on the road, but any car during the war that was legally on the road had to display a disc similar to this. Alongside it is a copy of the last tax disc that would have been gone on the car, dated 1960. £13 it was costing to tax this car in 1960, which was, in today's money, was quite an amount. But that disc shows that it was on the road until then. And the last one there is a modern one, the Irish Austin 7 Club, which I have to give a shout out to because they have been hugely supportive in technical information, huge source for parts, and a great bunch of guys and girls. We organise runs from April to October where we might do 100 miles of a Sunday with what we call a picnic run. And it has given great excuses to actually just get out and use the car. It's dead safe because you're amongst a whole load of other pre-war cars. Guaranteed one or somebody will break down. That adds to the fun of it, and there's always somebody there to help that person, whoever it is. Luckily, I've yet to break down, so I'm sure my day will come yet. So, John, this is your first experience, I would imagine, of pre-war motoring. It can be an assault on the senses, because they're quite mechanical. And at the same time, she's proven a very easy car to drive. It's my first experience of anything of this age, so it's been a huge learning curve. But once you get used to the mechanical quirkiness of the car, it's like driving any ordinary car, any modern car you could think of. The only thing you really need to plan in advance is hills, getting your gearing right, and knowing that you need to stop, and the brakes can be, well, leisurely is probably the best way of putting it. But she trundles along 35-40 miles an hour. She will do happily all day long. I'll regularly do a 100-mile trip if I'm out on one of the club runs, and doesn't knock anything out of it. It just drives away. It doesn't seem to overheat, and once you give it plenty of notice, it'll just drive away. So we're doing what, just 30 miles an hour here now, and oil pressure is good, the ammeter is good, so there's plenty of feedback from instruments, basic and all as the car is. They came with reasonable instrumentation when you consider this was regarded as an early family car. So you just need to watch when you're coming into corners and that you're giving everybody else enough room. It's one of the first cars in mass production to have the pedals in the right place. This being a later model, has no manual advance retard, so the steering wheel is as you would expect, and there's nothing foreign up in the steering wheel as you would have had in some of the earlier cars. So once it's open to 4th gear, and this comes with a 4-speed gearbox. Some of the earlier ones had only a 3-speed. Mechanically it just quietens down and it becomes quite relaxed. It is quite bouncy. Suspension is not hydraulic, it's pure leaf springs and friction damping, so it can get fairly challenged on very bumpy roads, but if you keep your speed at a reasonable pace, it's actually quite comfortable. So she'll pull away. I mean, you can keep a reasonable pace up, even though it's a fairly steep hill there now. Back into 3rd, and once she's clearing it, you're into 4th again, and off she goes. So you get used to reading the road a bit more than you will in a modern car. So you're anticipating hills, anticipating corners. We're just coming up onto a main road here now, so we'll be coming to a stop. The clutch on these, they're basically like a switch. There's very little play or very little slip on them. So the clutch is either in or it's out. This being a later model Austin 7, used synchro mesh on 2nd, 3rd and 4th. So once you're out of 1st gear, gear changes are relatively easy then. But it's the reaction from the members of the public, whether they're children, whether they're older people, the attention the car gets is quite amazing. It brings a smile to people's faces when they see the car going along. You get people standing out on the side of the road looking at it when they hear it coming. It adds to the thrill and it adds to the fun of driving it. It's happy when she's tootling along at the 35, 40 or bringing it in through towns is always very happy, and she just pull away.
In front of the arts building, that building in front, if we go down to the left, it's in the right side.
Okay.
The right cars.
Yeah, no bother. No, it doesn't. And it doesn't like speed bumps.
So listen folks, thanks very much for joining us in this week's episode, and a huge thank you to the owner for coming out and talking about their car and showing us around it. And let me know under the video in the comments, did you enjoy it? Did you like it? Any memories of these cars? Share it with us, we'd be delighted to hear. Thanks very much folks, adios.